Hello, everyone. I'm Ivo Daalder, president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and this is World Review. This Friday, June 3rd, we're going to be looking at the Ukraine war on day 100. Where is it going, and will the West continue to be united in support of Ukraine? Then we'll turn to Iran in the Middle East. It looks like the prospects for a resumption of the Iran nuclear deal are dead, and in the meantime, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is warning that Iran may now have enough nuclear material for a bomb. And then we'll look at politics in Britain. Boris Johnson was able to survive every single scandal. The question is he still able to survive right now? Here with us this week to look at all of these issues are Philip Stephens, who is a contributing editor of the Financial Times and author of Inside Out newsletter. Philip joins us from Florence, Italy. Philip, great to have you back.
Great to be with you.
And from New York, Bobby Ghosh, a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. Bobby, great to have you.
Thanks for having me again.
And unfortunately, we are just the three of us this week, late cancellation. Sometimes that happens, so we'll just dive right in. Philip, let's start with you. Day 100. Very few people thought on the February 24 that 100 days later, we would be where we are today. A continuing war, things moving slightly in Russia's direction, but that's after many, many weeks of suffering real failure on the battlefield and real pressure from a very united West. What can we expect going forward? Where would we be 100 years from today?
100 days from today. I think, the first thing to say is, as you have said, this is before we talk about what's happening on the ground sort of this week or tomorrow, this is a remarkable situation when set against the expectations, the Russian expectations that they'd be in Kiev in a matter of days with a new puppet government taking over the whole country. They've been beaten in the battle for Kiev, driven back. They've suffered huge losses. They're now pushing forward, as you said, incrementally, sort of kilometer by kilometer in the Donbass region, but at very heavy cost. But they are inflicting some pretty heavy costs on the Ukrainians. So we're pretty close to a stalemate, but the Ukrainians are fairly confident that as new weaponry continues to flow into Ukraine, and particularly some of the heavy artillery and rockets now promised, they can turn that round and begin to push the Ukrainians back. You hear from intelligence and military people that the Russian forces, though more disciplined than in the initial stages of the war, are still fatigued, pretty much broken, a lot of conscripts. So people are optimistic that the Ukrainians can withstand this present push and then probably begin to push the Russians back. What there isn't is within 3 months, within 100 days, we should be here. And there is it must be said, a background fear that there'll be, some sort of deadlock within the next 2 or 3 months, may get to a position where it's too costly for either side to move significantly forward. And then the question, what then?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I agree. When I think looking back 100 days, who would have thought we are here? But it doesn't mean that the same kind of projection that we had in the past 100 days can now go forward. And stalemate seems to be the most likely, some form of stalemate with a fluid battlefield seems the most likely issue. Bobby, the other thing that is really surprising, of course, is this unity of the West. That is, 100 days ago, would we have thought that the European Union would have ended its dependence on Russian coal and agreed to end by the end of the year 90% of its dependence on Russian oil, as the United States has also done, and by that time probably also start thinking about gas. A major step this week on oil in particular. But how long will Europe be able to, and Europe and the West be able to remain united in this way, particularly given the economic cost that the sanctions are starting to inflict on our own nations, primarily through inflation and lower growth?
Well, it seems very clear that Putin, having failed to score those early military victories that he was counting on, is now counting on the attrition to wear down the Europeans. He's hoping that the Germans and the French particularly will not go whole hog on the Ukrainian side. But I don't think he can reasonably expect the Europeans to go back to the old energy arrangements that they had. That, I think, those changes are good. I can't imagine, having learned their lesson this time, that the Europeans will turn around and decide, well, we're going to take Russian oil after all. Especially since other sources of supply are now becoming more and more available. So I think in the calculus, in the long run, regardless of what the Europeans do, the economic argument is already lost. The question is whether he can now expect the Europeans to pull away from Ukraine and allow Ukraine to drop into his lap. The Ukrainians will have a say about that. And I don't see that, frankly, in any which way that Putin, even if the Europeans can't stomach a long-running economic cost, I can't see a situation in which Putin emerges from this victorious.
Philip, I think I think Bobby is right that 100 days in, there's one clear loser if we don't quite know who the winner is, and it is Vladimir Putin. And the dynamic that is set in is really making it difficult for him to reclaim the initiative. And yet, talking to folks both in Europe and I spent the last couple of days here in Washington, there seems to be a disquiet about whether, in fact, we can all keep together when it comes to Ukraine and the war aims and the long-term policy towards Russia. Whether, in fact, it's possible, no matter what happens in the war, to keep the pressure on Russia in the way we did during the Cold War through a policy of containment, or whether the pressure will be to try to get back to business as usual, even if it's not on energy, just on a lot of other things. And you're in Italy, a place where the Italian government is another big pressure to get to a quick ceasefire, presumably in order to get back to some kind of economic relationship with Russia. Is this a worry that you're hearing about the divisions that now exist are emerging in Europe, and perhaps even between Europe and the United States?
I think there's a couple of things going on here. One, there's one splinter, and that's Viktor Orban's Hungary, and he's very pro-Putin. Hungary's very dependent on oil. So we saw at the summit last week he was blocking the oil sanction until he got special exemptions for Hungary. He also blocked the sanctioning of the high Patriarch Kirill, who's the head of the Orthodox Church in Russia. There was a ban on him imposed. But that's a splinter, not a split. The rest, I think, what you're seeing are differences of both analysis and perspective, and they're to do as much as anything else with geography and history. On the eastern side of the continent, you've got those countries which are either part of the former Soviet Union or within the umbrella of the Warsaw Pact, for whom, they say, frankly, the politicians say, for us, this is existential. If he gets away with this in Ukraine, we could be next. And that's particularly true of the small Baltic states. So their war aims, if you want to call it that, go well beyond the sort of, a strong performance on the battlefield by the Ukrainians. They want Putin to be sufficiently damaged, beaten, humiliated, some would say, that he can never do this again. And you've heard a bit of an echo of that in the British position as well, where this isn't about just Ukraine. This is about, delivering a really heavy blow to Putin. But that's certainly what you hear from the Baltic states. You also hear that in Poland and in some of the other Central European states. And then you have others who say, hang on, whatever happens here, and that they're not trying to put, I think the French and the Germans are being rather traduced in when people suggest that they're trying to undermine Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, but they are saying, look, we have to think, at some point this war is going to end. We're going to have to, Russia will still be there. It'll still have nuclear weapons. We're going to have to think about what sort of relationship we have. And do we want to set up war aims which go beyond, if you like, turning the tide in Ukraine? And I think the answer to that is no. I don't think, honestly, that's because they want to reestablish economic relations. I think Germany now has said it's going to be free of Russian gas in 4 years' time. I don't think that's going to change. I think they've realized that strategic dependency can't last. But they do think, look, we're going to have to live with Russia, and what sort of arrangement are we going to have? And so they are, I think they're in France and Germany in particular, but also Italy to a degree. I mean, everyone wants a ceasefire because, people are being slaughtered out there, and it's a terrible, this is a terrible war, a really bloody, brutal war, as it's been fought by the Russians. So, but I don't think anyone is in the business of trying to push Ukraine into giving up early. It's a question of how far beyond the sort of Ukraine battlefield do you set your war aims. And I think, that is clearly going to bubble along, and, these politicians will watch public opinion closely. Here in Italy, Draghi, who's, wrenched Italy away from a very pro-Russian policy, has had the people behind him, not the media, actually. Berlusconi's TV is constantly putting the Russian case for Putin. But those are considerations. But so I think there are real differences in strategic analysis and perspective, and they're heightened by the experience of the post-Soviet states bordering Ukraine and the post-Warsaw Pact states. But I don't see this as a deep division. As far as the US is concerned, people here say, well, they're not quite sure what the US position is, because Joe Biden, speaking sort of off the cuff, often sounds, and certainly in Speaker Pelosi, sound as if they really want, they're taking the sort of, we've got to really defeat Putin here. And yet in other times, the administration sounds a lot sort of more considered and balanced in its view. So there's a bit of uncertainty about what the US view is as far as Europe's concerned.
I've spent the last couple of days here in Washington, as I said, trying to sort of figure out what the U.S. view is. And I think we're seeing partly a similar debate happening inside the administration when it comes to not so much the war aims in Ukraine, where President Biden's op-ed a couple of days ago in the New York Times tried to make very clear that we were not going to tell the Ukrainians what to do. We were going to help them shape the battlefield at a moment to have a negotiation that would be maximize the ability of Ukraine to achieve what it needs to achieve through negotiations after the battlefield has been set. But it's the Ukraine is going to decide when and that will happen. But on the question of how far do you want to push the war in order to weaken Russia, on the one hand, people want to weaken Russia. On the other, they're worried as a leader of NATO. About escalation and how far you put it. And this debate we had inside the administration about how far the range of the new rocket system that we're sending would be, and the assurance by the Ukrainians that they wouldn't use these systems against Russian territory, but very much part of the worry about escalation. I think it's much more about that worry than it is in some ways about the future of Russia. In that way, because the U.S. has special responsibilities on the escalatory front. Bobby, you want to add anything on this American debate? Politics, of course, is also important here in and of itself.
Well, I think the two things to consider. One is that you have to judge. The only real way to judge the amount of support is by looking at the weapon systems that are going in. As long as weapon systems are still going in, we have to assume, and I take it that is how the Russians will be calculating this as well. As long as the weapon systems are going in to Ukraine on the Ukrainian side, then there is the support for Ukraine lives on. I would also watch public opinion very closely. That Ukraine fatigue that you're talking about. We live in democracies, and our leaders often tend to be led by public opinion. And as Ukraine sort of slips down in the list of things that ordinary Americans or Europeans care about, our leaders will feel more and more free to sort of disengage to the extent possible. So those are two things to watch: which way the weapons are going and which way the polls are going.
Well, on both of those, just to emphasize, I think there is a sense of Ukraine fatigue, particularly in the United States, and a conviction from folks in the White House and other places that it's going to be very hard to get another package through at the magnitude, of course, of the last package. Yes, they point out that twice Congress upped the ante on the package, but at some point, the argument about what are you doing for us here at home when you're spending $40–50 billion on Ukraine is going to have serious impact, particularly as you get closer to midterm elections and perhaps a change in who controls Congress. So let's, but more to come on all of this. As we said, we're only 100 days in. It may be nobody thought we would be here where we were 100 days ago, but who knows where we're going to be 100 days from now on this war. We'll be back talking about those things, I'm sure, in the weeks to come. But let's switch to the Middle East, and in particular, two big stories. Bobby, one, really the sense that negotiations with Iran have concluded in not succeeding to bring back the nuclear deal. There may still be some people in Europe hoping that it will, but it doesn't look like it. And some pretty worrying signs on the Iranian nuclear front. And then secondly, a surprise announcement that the president of the United States will go to Saudi Arabia and meet with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, when there after having campaigned saying that we need to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. One big change and one big disappointment.
Well, I've been saying for a while now, and on this program, that Biden's position on Saudi Arabia was very hard to sustain or justify, especially since he was perfectly happy to shake hands with other bloodstained tyrants like General Sisi of Egypt. And now he's in this unedifying position of having to go to Riyadh with his hat in his hand and plead with the prince that he threatened to turn into a pariah, and a prince who won't take his calls. This is not a shining moment for Biden and his appreciation of foreign policy. But this is what he's going to have to do. The Saudis have already announced a small increase in production as a gesture towards the president. We'll see whether they'll agree to more when he gets there. It's just as likely that they will be happy to greet him at the palace and pose for photographs, but then not give him very much by way of an increase in oil production. They too will have been watching the negotiations with Iran over the nuclear deal very, very closely. Obviously, they are, if you like, at the firing line of Iran. They are threatened both from the north through Iraq and the south through Yemen by Iranian proxies. And maybe the fact that the Iran deal doesn't seem to be going anywhere might actually, in a perverse way, work out in Biden's favor, because if that deal looked imminent, then the the Saudi anxiety would be even greater. I've been under the impression, and I've written this, that the Iranians have been stalling for many, many months now. I've not been convinced that they were actually looking for a deal. My best guess is that they are now aspiring to nuclear threshold status rather than full nuclear weapon status, which is the kind of place where Korea and Japan are, which is the ability to quickly break out for some sort of even a dirty bomb as a deterrent without actually testing a weapon for the moment. And that will be enough, I think, from the Iranian regime's point of view, to keep all its neighbors and its enemies guessing, keep them in line, and allow Iran to continue to exert its influence in the region through its many proxies across the Arab world. Pretty soon, though, we're going to have to seriously begin to think what to do about an Iran that is a threshold state. And that's going to require a greater degree of unity between the US and Europe than we have seen over these past few years. We're going to have to see whether the Russians and Chinese will make the same calculations as they have done before. Very likely not. The Chinese have been buying enormous quantities of Iranian oil this past year, but the Biden administration has allowed them to do that, has not really imposed the sanctions that are in the books with any degree of vigor. The Russians, of course, currently distracted, but they've been in Iran's corner throughout the negotiations. New challenge for the Biden administration. And that challenge may become even more complicated after the midterms in November.
I think that sets it up really nicely, Bobby and Philip. I mean, two questions to you. One, of course, is the Iran nuclear deal wasn't just a U.S.-Iran deal. It was really originally pushed by the EU3, the French and the Germans and the UK with the European Union as a chief negotiator, and they're still trying to figure out a way to get back to this deal that now seems pretty much a dead end. And it does raise, in a larger context, a threshold status for Iran may entice other countries in the region, the Saudis, to start thinking about a nuclear capability as well. And clearly, one of the lessons, once again, learned in the war in Ukraine is that if you don't have nuclear weapons, or you give them up, as the Ukrainians did, that doesn't provide you with security unless you have a guarantee by the United States to provide for your security. And so there is this question, it seems to me, that we're opening up this new world that long we feared about, but it may actually now happen, of a more rapid nuclear proliferation in the region. Is this something we should be worried about?
Yeah, I think it is. Before I talk about Iran, though, just to add something on Saudi Arabia, because it seems to me that, I mean, Biden going is deeply embarrassing, but this is the world that we're now in, where where Europeans and Americans can talk about this great conflict between democracies and autocracies, until the moment they realize that we, the democracies, actually need some of the autocrats to be on our side. So we're going to have a world in which we have democracies, good autocrats, not really good, but they have to be put in that box, and bad autocrats. And so this is the beginning, I think, of a world in which, realpolitik, Kissingerian, realism, really imposes itself rather more. The world needs the oil, the West needs the oil. So, Biden has to go. But this is not a one-off. I think we're going to see this. And we see it in other ways, in the fact that India isn't imposing any sanctions against, Russia, but you don't hear the US or Europeans criticizing India for that, because we need India in the Indo-Pacific. So we're going to see this much more sort of instrumental approach, I think, to foreign policy.
Before you jump on Iran, let me, because Bobby wants to interject on Saudi, I think. Bobby, you want to come back on the Saudi issue?
Actually, I was going to make a very minor point that you brought up Kissinger, who lives about a mile down the road from me here. But it's ever been thus that realpolitik has been around, at least since he was foreign secretary. And you would have thought that a man like Joe Biden, 40 years or 50 years in various committees of foreign policy, would understand that. For a man with his experience, which he boasts about all the time, not to have seen this one coming is really quite shocking.
Well,
that's where domestic politics and running for office starts interfering with foreign policy expertise. It sometimes happens, but yes, it's a good point. Philip, back to you on Iran.
On Iran, I think the view among the Europeans is very much as you stated it. It doesn't look like the government, the regime in Tehran, really wants to do a deal. It's not just that the Russians haven't been helpful at all, as I understand it. Bobby probably knows it closer than I am, but as I understand it, the Russians have been pretty obstructive in some of these negotiations as well. But this sense that, and I talked a little while ago to one diplomat, and he basically said that, the Iranians have ridden out the sanctions, and they're saying to themselves, what do we actually get from this deal? And they, there hasn't been, in terms of lifting all the sanctions, a good enough deal put on the table for them. But as you say, they may well have decided that it's they're better served now by becoming, as you say, a threshold state, and that's that is bad for the world, because the Saudis will follow, and the Saudis, as we know, finance Pakistan's nuclear program. And, there's always an assumption that, maybe there was some deal done. People talk about the Islamic bomb, as it were, is that. But it's not just, it's not just the Iranians. I was talking to some colleagues in Japan the other day who were saying, it's not, they're not rushing into having a nuclear bomb, but after Ukraine, it's become respectable, in the Japan sort of military political establishment, to talk much more openly about whether, whether Japan should move to that sort of threshold status. If Japan now feels threatened by China, Russia, and North Korea, they look ahead and say, well, how strong is the American security guarantee? So I think these discussions are going to be, had in a number of places around the world, and this is one of the consequences of Putin's, brutal and reckless war. What I don't hear from the Europeans, which I have heard in the past, is a lot of criticism of the US administration, that they haven't been pushing far enough. There doesn't seem to be a divide within the alliance, more a sense of resignation. I'm sure some of the European states would have liked the US to push harder, but there isn't, I don't think, a big transatlantic split on this.
I mean, Bobby, we are seeing more voices in Japan. We're certainly seeing a lot more voices in South Korea talking about these the capability and whether there's a need to start rethinking the nuclear posture, not only nationally, but bringing U.S. nuclear weapons back, which the more conservative elements in Korea talk about. And in Saudi, this search for nuclear power has always been very suspicious for a country that has more oil and gas than anything else. What do you see as the quiet debate? Are you hearing anything in the quiet debate in Saudi about, if the Iranians are going to go there, shouldn't we think about that as well? And then of course the Egyptians and others are going to say, well, if them, why not us? Is this the world we're entering in?
Very likely, yes, it is. The Saudis have been having that conversation for a while. The Emiratis already have a nuclear power station, although they haven't indicated any interest in weapons. The Emiratis might settle for the presence of American nuclear weapons in the region to protect them. But I would also look out for Egypt, where you have essentially a military dictator who is very fond of shiny weapons, as military dictators often are. So yeah, this is the much more complicated world that we live in. My own view is that this was coming one way or the other, with or without the JCPOA. Without it, this has been hastened perhaps by 5 to 10 years, but I think this was always coming. By the way, quickly, breaking news as I look upon my Bloomberg terminal, Joe Biden is now saying that he has no direct plans to visit Saudi Arabia, but that he will likely meet with the kingdom's leaders, no names, if a trip to the region came together. So make what you will of that. He seems to be. This is the reverse of the usual position where Biden shoots from the hip and the White House then tries to dial it down. Here you have the White House making it being known that he's going to Saudi Arabia, and now Biden saying maybe not. This does not speak well of the communications coming out of this administration.
I think that's true, but I think they were listening to our discussion here, Bobby, and they decided that that's how they need to react to it. As the criticism was getting too deep from Bobby Ghosh to survive. So
I would encourage him to go. I think that this has been a very foolish position all along. The position he's taken on Saudi Arabia and MBS. If he were listening to my advice, he would have already gone.
Yeah, but
this would be making his second trip.
But now he needs to stand on principle. So we'll see how long that lasts. But you're right. The communications and the White House. This is the reverse way. It's now the president walking back his own White House.
Yeah. You can reconcile those two things, though, I think, by saying, isn't there a meeting of the Gulf Council that's supposed to be held in Saudi Arabia? So if you wanted to reconcile those two, you'd say that the president goes to a meeting of the Gulf Council, which is in Saudi Arabia. Of course, when he's in Saudi Arabia, he obviously meets the leaders of that country. One other thought on Saudi Arabia, I think one of the big tests is going to be whether the US agrees to supply them with some more sophisticated weapons, particularly Patriots and things like that. And that, I think, more than if you like, the sort of rhetorical signaling will decide what the Saudis do on oil. If we, I think it's a pretty much give us the weapons and we'll give you the oil. Maybe in the end, what the bargain is.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think we should probably also mention that the announcement, that is the leak or whatever it was on the potential visit, coincided with an extension of the ceasefire in Yemen, which of course the administration has pressed the Saudis on for a long time. The ceasefire's been now been in effect for 2 months, will be extended for another 2 months. And given the situation, the terrible humanitarian situation in Yemen, by the way, also a food crisis aggravated significantly by the absence of grains from exports from Ukraine and Russia, is probably a good thing. And I think it sort of was part of maybe a package, and maybe that's the package. There's a visit, there's some weapons, there's increased oil, there's a Yemeni ceasefire to say, but in the realpolitik terms, this is about our interests that we're trying to extend, and presumably, Bobby, you would have made that more forcefully earlier on as part of that case. So we have a few minutes left. So the last story that I think we have turned to is the question of whether Boris Johnson is toast. But we're back at this, Philip. It seems actually, in a way that at least I didn't expect, that even though in the midst of the Jubilee celebration, the 70-year of Elizabeth on the throne, there is a serious debate in the Conservative Party about whether it's time to have a no confidence vote in the leader, and a belief that perhaps this time, if there is, he may lose. How do you see it?
Yeah, well, in fact, these 4 days of celebrations back in London for the Queen were supposed to have been a sort of ceasefire between, the Johnson's critics in his own party. So no, there was no distraction, because there's been a lot in the last couple of weeks of speculation about whether there will be enough Tory MPs who put down a motion of no confidence to force him to accept the vote. But there was supposed to be a ceasefire. But then this morning, I just saw this on the TV. There's a great ceremony to celebrate at St. Paul's Cathedral, to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. Everyone's there, except sadly the Sovereign, who couldn't travel from Windsor. She's got some problems, we're told, with her mobility and some pain. But anyway, the Prime Minister arrives, and the crowds outside, or at least some of them, start booing. Now, this is extraordinary because, these are a bunch of the sort of people who go to these things are monarchists, they're conservatives, they're not your left-wing sort of firebrands demonstrators. So I think it shows you how deep Johnson's problems are. Now, he should have been, to recap, he should have been gone by now. He's the first prime minister in British history to have been found by the police to have broken the law. He misled the House of Commons, which in the British constitutional terms is a capital offence. He had dire local election results. His personal ratings are miserably low. And then a week or so ago, we had a report by a senior civil servant into the way that Downing Street, including the staff, behaved during the COVID lockdowns. And this Sue Gray said, could have said, given the content of a report, that this was more like a frat house than the center of government. People drinking, staying up late, breaking the laws that the government has set. So he should have gone. Why is he still here? He's still here because he has a strong base among Tory activists. It's a parallel here you see with Donald Trump, his worst moments. He was the leader of the Brexit campaign, and although Brexit's doing us no good, there are still a lot of people who define themselves as Brexiters. And he's a PM who has won an election and, as I say, got Brexit done. Now, is that going to be enough to save him? I don't personally think it is. One other thing in his favor, there's no obvious contender. There's no obvious successor. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was seen as the leader in waiting, but he too got a fine from the police for breaking the lockdown rules. So the Tory party, and it's the MPs who make the first sort of move, there have got to be 54 of them who demand this out of 360 who demand this vote, confidence vote. I think we're pretty much there. I think we probably will get there in the next week and there will be a no confidence vote. It's not certain that he'd lose that vote because, he might get more than half of the three. He might get his 180, whatever it is, to get through. But I think, if he loses many more than 100, he's finished. And I think the danger for the Tory party and for the country is that there is a confidence vote. He wins it, but wins it badly. And then this goes on and on for more months. I mean, Theresa May faced a confidence vote. She won it, but 100 and something MPs voted against her. So she staggered on in office for another 6 months. My own view is that his premiership is over. Government is paralyzed. The sort of behavior that's been exposed in Downing Street has been appalling. It's against all the norms and traditions of our democracy. So he should be gone. So I'll stick my neck out and say he will be, but it might take a while yet.
One day, Boris Johnson will no longer be the leader of the Tory party. The question is it this week, next month, or next year? Bobby, you lived in London for a long time. You've lived through part of the trauma that the country went when it went through the last leadership election and some of Boris Johnson's premiership. How does it look from you? You agree with Philip? He's gone.
Yes, I think Philip put it masterfully. I think it'll all turn on whether or not the party thinks it can win an election without him. The Conservatives, in my understanding, have traditionally been very transactional about this. They back a leader who can win them an election, and if they too take the same make the same assessment as Philip did from that scene outside the church this morning when he was being booed. If they look at that and it sort of now finally occurs to them that this guy can't win them the next election, then they will throw him over. Liz Truss seems very keen to be considered the next leader, to judge by what I've been reading, as shocking and as shocking as that is. But, you know, Boris Johnson has been prime minister and leader of the party for some years, so I guess we shouldn't be shocked anymore.
Well, I think, you know, I think there is a view that, you know, Boris Johnson, if nothing else, is a serial liar. This has been proved over and over again. And a liar who, you know, completely disregards the conventions and processes of government. So in one sense, as a citizen, I sort of think anyone would be better, because none of the other possibilities, you know, I think all the other possibilities will restore some integrity and some decorum to the conduct of British government. But someone like Liz Truss, whose, you know, grasp of foreign policy we've seen in the last few months has been light, to be polite. I don't know. There are one or two good conservatives, one level down, as it were. There's a guy called Tom Tugendhat, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee, who's a really smart, for a 45-year-old former soldier, would be really good. I think one of the sort of dark horse candidates is someone called Ben Wallace, who's the Minister of Defence. He's not my, you know, he wouldn't be my ideal candidate, but he's again a former soldier, a man of integrity, one, you know, thinks, and so it could be him. But it's a very curious electoral system, because the way it works is that the Tory MPs choose two candidates whose names are then put forward to the party activists. And there aren't very many of them. There are about 80, 100,000, average age about 75. So who they choose is really difficult to say. But as I say, as a citizen, I think any alternative will at least restore some of the dignity that our democracy deserves.
Well, at least none of the people you're mentioning is what we in the United States would be looking for, which is somewhere deep septenarian, if not an octenarian, an octogenarian to take over, because we apparently can only have leaders who were born around the end of World War II these days, in order to lead our country. But that's neither here nor there. Just to Bobby's point, I think one of the key things to watch for is 2 by-elections later this month. If those go against the Tories, as they look like, one going to Labour, one to the Liberal Democrats, that will reaffirm the sense of the party that this is not the man to take the Tories into the next election, and might put the point to it. I'd end by saying that that just as I think the United States had to spend too much time thinking about the personalities of particular leaders, it would be good for Britain to start thinking about some of the serious issues that confront the country, including the union itself, which is brittle in the post-Brexit period, the challenge that exists in Northern Ireland with Sinn Féin.
There are huge challenges.
There's some really big, not to mention the economy, which I think is hit harder than the EU and US economies by COVID in particular. And like everyone, I think the world will be better off. Certainly Britain will be better off if internal party politics can be put aside and we can get back to the serious business of governing, which we sometimes we hope to have true in the United States as well. Again, maybe a positive note to end on for this week. I want to thank Philip Stephens, Bobby Ghosh for your insights on many of the issues and all of the issues we discussed today. I want to wish everyone watching and tuning in a good rest of the Friday and a good weekend. And we'll be back next week with another edition of World Review. Until then, bon weekend.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Likewise.